It's Ash from Super Videos back with another video for The Last of Us on HBO. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at some new details about Season 2 of The Last of Us on HBO. We're going to talk about potential delays due to the writers' strikes that have been happening, and also some details about how much of Part 2 of The Last of Us will translate to the Season 2 adaptation, and whether we're going to see any significant changes. So stay tuned, we'll be right back to break this down. Alright, as always, before we dive into it, smash the like button, subscribe to join our community, and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. With that said, let's dive right into it. So recently, Craig Mazin, who's one of the showrunners, talked about Season 2 of The Last of Us, and he revealed a lot of information about what to expect and some story details and stuff like that. So let's get into all of that. First, the expectation for The Last of Us is to return sometime in 2025. So obviously, because of the writer's strike, there's been a delay because originally it was supposed to come out in 2024. So it's been pushed back by at least 1 year due to the writer's strike. But the expectation at this point is that it will return in 2025. Next, Part 2 is split into Season 2 and 3. This was something they talked about pretty early on as well. So obviously not the entirety of Part 2 will translate to one season. It'll be Season 2 and 3. Now, the big question is, where are they going to end Season 2? And whether they're going to make any significant changes to the story, specifically the story revolving around Joel. We don't know a lot of that yet, but there's some details that we're going to go through that might give us some subtle hints about what to expect from that perspective. Next, the show will not end with Season 2 unless people don't watch and will get cancelled. That's what Craig Mazin said. So obviously this connects to what I just said, but the idea is that they're planning to do 2 seasons, but if people don't watch, if they get cancelled, there would be no Season 3, and at this point, I think that's highly unlikely. Next thing that he talked about is that Episode 1 has been written before the deadline. The deadline they're talking about is the deadline for the writer's strike. So after a deadline, writers couldn't write anything, like you couldn't do anything in that area as far as pushing a TV show along, but they did write the story for Episode 1 before the deadline, which means that they have the story for Episode 1. So what I think this means is that, if anything, they might be able to do some production and even maybe filming for Episode 1, especially parts that don't necessarily involve actors, main actors like Pedro Pascal, who plays Joel, or Bella Ramsey, who plays Ellie. So that means that they might be able to do a little bit for Episode 1 even before the story for the rest of the episodes is written. Next, they say they have a clear idea what the whole season is going to be, which makes sense. I mean, if they're going to split it into 2 seasons, that means they know where they're going to end Season 2. They better know where they're going to end it. I'm assuming that it's going to end on like a high note, on a cliffhanger, or on some sort of a setup for Season 3. Next, some events will happen exactly the same as the game, while others will be done differently and surprise players as they watch it unfold. That was pretty much the case for Season 1 as well, so not much to really break down because this information matches the ideology or the perspective they were looking at things for Season 1 as well. Next, the season will create furor, but will follow the story the way they believe should be told, and not merely for shock value. Now this to me screams that they're going to do some changes to the Joel story. I'm not going to get into what that is, just in case there are people here who haven't played Part 2 of the game, but this just screams to me that they're going to change things when it comes to a shocking aspect of Part 2, and at this point, the only shocking aspect of Part 2 was Joel. So I'm assuming that this has to connect to that in some way. The other thing that this reveals to me, and this is like reading between the lines a little bit, but this proves that the story they wrote for part 2 was purely and merely for shock value. And they obviously saw the negative outcomes and the backlash over that, hence why they're not gonna go through that again. Next, there will be events not in the game, and that's okay, as Mazin stated. Again, this connects to one of the other points that we talked about, which is that they're gonna change things here and there, but some parts are gonna stay exactly like they were, which makes sense. Like I said, they did the same thing and they applied the same principle in season 1 as well. Next, there's gonna be more infected, clickers, and even hordes, like in episode 5. One of the biggest criticisms for season 1 was the lack of the infected and zombies, which didn't really help the situation because fans watching The Last of Us were fans of the video game, who are hardcore horror fans. So if you give them something that doesn't have quite as much horror in it, you're gonna hear a lot of negative criticism over that, and that's exactly what happened. And I think that they learned their lesson, and they're gonna give us more infected, more clickers, and even hordes, like they mentioned, in season 2 and most likely season 3, which I think is a good thing. So they learned their lesson, and now they're gonna change and make it better. This doesn't do anything for season 1. Season 1 was a disappointment, but at least it might bring to life a part 2 of the video game that's a lot better than the video game itself. Next, there is going to be no more Bill and Frank episodes. And then Craig Mazin went on to say, we aren't going to milk it. So obviously, the Bill and Frank episode of season 1 was one of the most criticized episode, and one episode that many fans loved as well. So it was a mixed bag of fans just hating it and loving it, but they know that they shouldn't milk it, like he says, and that's a good thing. I didn't mind the episode, but compared to the game, it was definitely a shadow of what it could have been. Next, some characters from the first season will return. Pretty self-explanatory, not much to break down. As far as who those characters could be, I think maybe Tess, maybe Marlene, maybe Bill, maybe Frank, but unlikely because of the previous comments. But just characters like that. I mean, it could be characters that we saw, but they didn't really invest too much time on. Like the characters that were at Jackson, because Jackson is going to be a big part of season 2, hopefully. So maybe it's something like that. But that's pretty much all we can say about that. It could be any character that we saw in the first season. Obviously, that's not including Joel and Ellie themselves. But that's pretty much everything I wanted to go through. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash the like button. Subscribe to join our community and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.